As viruses multiply, they change. And the same is happening to the coronavirus.
All viruses mutate, and that is to be expected.
Scientists have been tracking those mutations while following coronavirus's journey around the world. Some of the mutations help the virus to spread, others do nothing at all. But as coronavirus multiplies and changes, could it also become more deadly? This is your COVID-19 special here on DW. I'm Chris Kober. Welcome to the program. The coronavirus is not the same that came out of China half a year ago. Like other viruses, it has mutated. And a recent study suggests the globally predominant strain is more infectious than the original.
The new coronavirus, like all other viruses, is constantly mutating as it replicates inside its human host. The virus uses us to multiply by injecting its genetic information into our cells. The cell then becomes a kind of virus factory, mass-producing the genetic material that allows more of the virus to develop. As the virus replicates, mistakes are often made. Errors mean the genetic material changes, causing a mutated version of the virus. If those changes are advantageous, the mutation will go on to spread. SARS-CoV-2 doesn't appear to mutate as easily as other viruses like influenza, for example. Experts say it doesn't have to, because thus far it's been so successful. Nevertheless, a mutation could take place that might hit humans much harder than previous versions of the virus. Of course, it would be an evolutionary disadvantage if, as a virus, my host died while I was trying to replicate. The most successful viruses are those that show no symptoms to begin with, allowing them to spread before taking down their host. If a more aggressive mutation of coronavirus were already spreading, it might be hard to spot.
That would require very complex testing in a lab. It would have to be done very precisely to be able to answer questions like, is this form more infectious? Can the immune system deal with it better? Such studies take a lot of time.
One major change in the virus has apparently already been determined. Earlier generations of coronavirus replicated in the lungs, and new mutations using host cells somewhere else in the body, the throat. More contagious, if not more deadly. So what does that mean for the search for a vaccine? Are researchers struggling to keep up with an ever-changing virus?
It completely depends on how this vaccine is designed, whether it does end up offering a broad immune response. The virus would have a tougher time quickly getting around a vaccine with a wide-reaching and very effective immune response.
It seems we may not need a new vaccine for every new year, like with influenza. That's at least the hope we have for the coming years. With every new patient emerging immune after surviving COVID-19, pressure piles on coronavirus to change. As it does, scientists will have to keep up.
Earlier, I spoke to Dr. Andreas Bacala of the Research Center for Molecular Medicine of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. And as there are now multiple versions of the coronavirus, I asked him if their characteristics were vastly different.
There are hundreds of different mutations, and this is a totally natural and normal process because these RNA viruses, they have an imperfect replication of their own genome. So per se, just finding mutations is nothing bad or good. This is just how nature works.
Okay, lab research shows that the globally dominating version of the coronavirus transmits more easily between humans now than the original did. Does that mean it's also more dangerous?
No, it does not mean that it's more dangerous. You're referring to one particular mutation that has been in the media over the last few weeks, and it's known by researchers for months already. It's called D614G mutation. And yes, it is a prevalent mutation that is found pretty much all over the globe by now. And also by now, scientists have actually obtained evidence in the lab, in vitro, that this mutation might lead to higher infectivity, again, in vitro. But what this actually means in a human-to-human transmission scenario and for the pandemic is still something researchers need to work out. So
it transmits more easily. Does that mean it's less contagious, less lethal?
I think at the moment there is very little evidence that it affects the clinical course of infection. The only thing, I guess, that is more or less hard evidence is that patients who have this virus with this given mutation tend to have a higher viral load. And a higher viral load could translate into higher transmissibility, but the actual proof for this is still missing and out there.
Are there ways to predict how viruses are likely to mutate?
That's a difficult one. I think it's easier to look backward retrospectively, and I think these mutation landscapes that we have basically identified in the past have been a wonderful tool to look back in history. Where does the virus come from, and tracking its history, right? But looking in a more prospective, future forward-looking perspective, this is, I think, more difficult. And this has to do with the fact that mutations occur randomly. And it depends on the context whether they might confer an advantage to the virus or not. So in that sense, I think you cannot predict exactly which will be the next mutations coming up. Yet the mutations that we have already actually tell us a lot about the history of the virus.
Now, as the novel coronavirus has changed, has mutated over the last couple of months, what does that mean for the development of a vaccine?
Of course, one maybe needs to explain that the vaccine is usually working by means of antibodies or also by another immune cell called T cells. And those immune cells and antibodies, they recognize specific regions in the virus, in the proteins of the virus. And so if these proteins would mutate away, then potentially the target is gone and the vaccine would not be working anymore. However, what is important to make clear is that a vaccine never has only one target, but it has multiple targets, tens or hundreds of targets. And in this regard, I think it's extremely unlikely that one or few mutations on the virus side would render a vaccine effectless.
Andreas Bacala, a member of the Research Center for Molecular Medicine of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. Thank you for your insights. And next up is Derek Williams. He's our science correspondent and has been hard at work answering your questions about COVID-19. Here's our latest installment.
Have any researchers tried ivermectin?
I talked about this a couple of months ago, but in light of recent developments, I thought it would be good to discuss it again. Health officials in some countries, particularly in South America, have been promoting the antiparasitic drug ivermectin as a treatment for COVID-19. And people have been buying up supplies of it, even though there's no solid evidence that the medication works against the new coronavirus. Ivermectin is, however, a very effective treatment for infestations of nasty things like lice and pinworms. One big problem now is that with stocks of the drugs used to treat humans depleted, people are beginning to self-dose with versions of the drug that are usually prescribed for animals. Now, it should be obvious why that's a very bad idea. There are human trials going on, and at least one has been concluded, but the first results don't really look very convincing. Until we know a lot more, the WHO is not recommending ivermectin for anything but what it was developed for, which is parasite infestations.
How different is SARS-CoV-2 to other viruses that infect us? For example, do people who catch influenza sometimes have no symptoms?
Yes, although asymptomatic is a pretty squishy term. We've known for decades that people who don't report flu symptoms can test positive as carriers for the bug. And older estimates usually put the number of asymptomatic carriers for flu at around 50%. A much-cited British study from 2014, however, determined an even larger number of people infected with influenza never develop symptoms, 77% to be exact. Now, if that's correct, it means not even 1 in 4 people who catch the flu will ever show any signs of it. One way or the other, even if the estimates don't all agree, there's plenty of evidence showing that it's quite common for us to catch a range of other viruses and show no signs of illness. And there's also broad agreement that those asymptomatic carriers are likely contributing significantly to the spread of those diseases.
And of course, you can post your questions to Derek on our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to keep up with the latest developments on the coronavirus pandemic, do subscribe to our newsletter. Just log on to dw.com/corona-newsletter. And finally, it's back to school for 6 million students in Seoul after a COVID-19 emergency in the South Korean capital. Schools reopened with many changes, though. Face masks, of course, are now a must for teachers and students, even on the soccer field. Temperature checks are now a daily experience. Anyone whose temperature exceeds 37.5 degrees Celsius is sent home. Students are also divided into rotations, meaning that some stay at home where they take virtual classes. South Korea was the first Asian country to reopen schools after a corona lockdown in May.